What's going on, guys? Rodnut44 back with you for another quick tutorial in the Microsoft Flight Simulator development series. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to animate and make a functional clock inside a Microsoft Flight Simulator. So this clock will actually be able to tell the current time in the sim. And I'm not going to be going into any details about modeling or texturing in this video. This is functionality only, so if you have not gotten to the point where your clock is created, go ahead and do that. If you need help with doing stuff like that, there's plenty of tutorial videos out there as far as modeling and stuff. It's pretty straightforward. So we're basically going to be starting from that point and moving forward. Let's take a look at what we have as far as our clock goes. We have the actual clock part, which if we isolate that, we can see it's the clock face and this entire wing structure. We have the pane of glass, which I'm just going to go ahead and hide by hitting the H on the keyboard with that part selected, because it's in our way for the hour, minute, and second hand, which are all loose as well. First things first, I'm going to click the eyeball to show that glass again, but I'm actually going to click on the second. I'm going to hold Shift and click on glass, and then hold Control and click on glass again. We'll just click it and drag and then hold down Shift and drop it over the clock so that we actually parent everything underneath our main clock. As far as I'm aware, this is not a requirement, but just because of how GLTF is supposed to be structured, when I do have parts like this that are technically child parts of another part, I do like to have them parented, especially if it's going to be exported like that, and it is going to be exported with loose parts. Just because we're animating this clock, the hour, minute, and second hand are all animated separately. They cannot be joined together, so we're going to at least have those three loose parts in here. The glass, we could join that to the main clock later on if we'd like to. For now, I'm just going to leave it loose so that it can be hidden and we can actually see the hands of the clock to work on them. Now, first thing we need to do is we need to go and retrieve the template names for the template we're going to use to animate this clock. And this is all built-in functionality. We do not have to do anything special to get to this point or to implement this clock. It's a built-in template that we're going to reference. And to do that, we need to navigate to our official packages folder. So because I'm on Steam, it is official Steam. And this folder is usually found alongside your community add-ons. Community add-ons folder. There'll be official folder there. It may be a little bit different for the Windows Store version, but being on Steam, this is my path. Steam FS-based aircraft common is the folder you're looking for. Model behavior defs, Asobo common. And then we're going to go in here and we're going to click on the instrument XML. And that'll bring up this template here. And I already had it open, so it didn't start me at the top. But this is what it'll look like if you start at the top. You can just pull open your search bar, which usually most programs is Control F if you hold that down or click that. It'll bring open the search bar and you can just type in like clock. And it should bring you down to where the template starts, which is right here. However, we're not just looking for this needle clock template, we're looking for the current time clock template, which is just a little bit below it. This is the template that we are going to be referencing in our SimObjects XML. Now, when we get to that, we're also going to take a look at the defaults of it, but we'll come back to that once we actually get to the part of setting up the template. For now, all we need to know is we need to know what do we need to call the node and what do we need to call the animation for it to work seamlessly with this template. And we can see that right down below here. Node ID hours, instrument needle clock hours. And we can see that there's one for the minutes and there's one for the seconds as well. We can also see that if I highlight that there, the node ID and the animation name are both the same. So all I need to do in this case is I just need to copy this instrument underscore needle underscore clock underscore hours. We'll go back over to Blender now, and we'll go to our node here for our hour hand, and we're just going to rename that to match what is inside the template. And the format is the exact same for the others. So I'm just going to rename them to what they are called in the template. Seconds. So hours, minutes, seconds. Now comes the part of actually animating the clock. And to do that, you can, if you're using the gizmo here, you don't have to be on forward view as long as you're selecting and rotating along the correct axis. However, just to make sure I don't accidentally screw up on anything, I do like to put it facing directly onto the clock. Down here at the bottom, this should be open by default in any new Blender file. We're gonna make sure that our keyframe selector here is set to 0. Make sure that this starts at keyframe 0, so set this as keyframe 0 here, and you can type in the end as 360 right here. That'll make this light gray area kind of our working area. And what we're going to do is we're going to animate this clockwise 0 to 360. And it does need to be a linear animation as well. I'll show you how to set that after we get them animated. For now, let's go ahead and move our mouse up to the top left corner here. You're going to click and drag to the right. That opens up a second window. We'll click this little drop down and set it to non-linear animation. We got this annoying sidebar here, so we'll just click N while we're inside that window, and that'll get rid of that. And now you can see that there's nothing over here because we've not done any sort of animation yet. But we're going to make this really nice and simple. So we are starting at the 12 o'clock position for each hand. Make sure they are set there. Also, before you get to this point, make sure you select all three and hit Control A and make sure you apply rotation. Actually, just apply rotation and scale. You should apply scale for the entire model, but definitely rotation and scale for these needles, so that if we hit the N menu here and we have one of them selected, we can hit item and we can see that the rotations are zeroed out. My scale is actually not applied, so I'll do that real quick. Just select them all, Control A. We'll just apply rotation and scale again. It's good practice. You should always apply rotation and scale before you export a model for the sim. But definitely apply it before you do animation work as well. So I'm going to start with the hour hand. We're going to set our reference point, or our starting keyframe. So we'll click under the keying tab here, and we'll make sure that this is set to rotation. By default, it is usually set to, I believe, location, rotation, scale. All we need is rotation, so just select that. And we'll go ahead and click the Add Keyframe button here. We can see it puts one down there. Move to 360 on the timeline, which you can also type in this box here if you want to. And we're just going to animate along the y-axis here. So we'll click and hold and drag just a little bit, and we can just type in 360, hit enter, and we're going to come down here and we're going to hit keyframe again, and if we scrub back along, we can see we now have a 0 to 360 animation for that hour arm of the clock. Now we're just going to do this real quick, exact same thing for the other two hands of the clock. Okay, now you can see if we scrub through the timeline here, all three hands are animated in unison. Set her back to the 0 keyframe, and then we're going to come over here to our NLA editor, and as we saw before, our node name matches the animation name, so we just need to make sure that these here are named exactly the same as what our node names are over here, so we can see it appends a little action 001 to the end of it. I'm just going to delete that just so it stays the exact same as what the node is over on the left, and we're going to do that for all three of the NLA tracks here. And once we're done, we can just go ahead and I'll verify real quick just to make sure. Yes, okay. We can go ahead and just click on this little push down action for all three of them. And if for whatever reason these are names over here on the right, if they are different than what you have on the left, that is not a big deal. The only one that matters are these over here on the left. So make sure those are set correctly. So now we have three NLA animations to match our three hands of the clock. I'm going to go ahead and go down here to the bottom, and we're going to click on Dope Sheet. I'm going to click on the hours hand over here, we'll go and we'll click on the hours track here so that it highlights that one in orange. You can hit tab on your keyboard and you should be able to see the keyframes here. Just make sure you hit A on the keyboard, make sure both keyframes get selected, and go to key, and then interpolation mode, make sure that is set to linear. Now, I personally have my Blender set up to just default to linear, which you can do somewhere in the settings. I don't remember exactly. Maybe under animation. Yeah, default interpolation, linear. Because typically in the sim, you're using a linear animation. And if I need to use any other form of animation, other than that, I am just going to go in and set the interpolation mode like I just showed you. So, just easier to do it this way. And you're going to make sure that linear is set for all three of these animations. Once you're done with that, you can go ahead and go back to the timeline, hit tab again on that, so we exit out. And now we have a fully animated clock, and all that's left to do is actually export the clock. So I'm going to go ahead and join the glass to my parent here, which I just click on the glass, hold down Control and click on the parent, and then just do Control J, and it'll join that together. We can see we now have a multi-material, leaving all three hands loose and parented under the main clock. I can now select the clock, hit A, and then we'll say File, Export as GLTF 2.0. Now, I am using the official Blender exporter version 1.3.3. You can grab that off of the, I believe it's Asobo GitHub page. If you just type in like Blender IO MSFS in Google, it'll come right up. I'll also make sure I link it down in the description below. And I'm using version 3.6.10 of Blender, which 3.6 and 3.3 I believe are the only supported branches of Blender for the official exporter. So definitely don't download Blender 4 or anything. It will not work correctly. I'm going to go in the export folder here. You can go ahead, a couple settings I like to have keep original selected. That just makes it so Blender doesn't export the textures again into your export folder. We don't need that because we're using the original textures anyways. And I remember export settings just so if I export again later, it keeps the export settings. And you can set a copyright if you want. It just puts it into the GLTF file. I do select inside the include selected objects, and everything else you can pretty much leave as default. I believe it'll have skinning on. I have it turned off, but I leave shape keys on, and definitely leave animation on. And make sure for this case, I believe you have to have sampling animations turned on. So if it's not turned on by default, make sure you have that turned on. And that's pretty much it. Like everything else you can leave as default. I do uncheck this Asobo unique ID because I don't think we really need that for what we're doing with scenery. At least not in the current state. Maybe that'll change in 2024, but for now I export without it. Just because it writes extra stuff to the file. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We can I'll just name this temp because I'm not actually going to use it. And we'll just export GLTF. And we can see now that if I go over to my project folder, modeling, clock tutorial, export, we can see it here, temp. And all we're going to do is we're going to copy this GLTF file over to our SimObject folder, which at this point you should already probably have set this up prior, but it's going to be inside of our project folder here. So package sources, SimObjects. I do like to put it inside of landmarks, so create a folder called landmarks, and then you can name this folder whatever you want. For me, I just named it ESD67FL hanger clock, and then I have inside of that a model, a texture folder, and a SimCFG. The model folder is where you're going to put your bin and GLTF file you just created. Obviously mine's named differently because I have already exported these. You're going to have a model CFG in here, and you're going to have a XML file. Your model CFG is what links and tells the SimObject to use the model. So you set it to whatever you name your XML in the same folder. So we can see here, They're named the exact same thing. And then the XML, we can go ahead and open that up. And we see here now is where we start working on the actual template portion of this file. And to do that, we need to have a behaviors open and close tag. Inside of that, you're going to say include path equals, in quotes, Asobo / common.xml. And that is a self-closing tag. So / then close. And then component ID equals clock, which you can name this component ID whatever you want. In other examples, we're not using it right now, but if we have like a component for, let's say, visibility, and we have a node in this, so component ID and a component node that we are referencing, the only difference is that this clock cannot be, or this, what we have named clock here, cannot be named the exact same thing as what we have set for the node. But we're not using that at all in this tutorial. So we can name that whatever. Then use template name, and we're going to call that template that I showed you before. So Asobo _instrument _needle _current _time _clock _template. That is a mouthful. And make sure it's capitalized and formatted just like it is in the actual template. If we go back and look at our instrument XML here, we can see right here. So the easiest thing to do is actually to just open this file up and just copy and paste it so that you know that it is exact. And then we're just going to close out that use template, as well as make sure you closed out the component tag as well. And this is basically all the code. Now, I mentioned before, I believe, that about some default settings. And if we look right here inside the template, we have an hours, a minutes, and a seconds, as well as this use time adjustment knob. These are the default settings that this template will use if you do not define anything or a replacement for these inside of your own template. So let's say that I am not using the seconds hand. I only have an hours and a minutes hand. Well, I don't need it to define a seconds hand at this point. So what I can do is I can just click right here underneath the template, and we'll just paste seconds in here, and we'll just change it from true to false. And that's as simple as doing that. You're just overriding that, which in this case we're using the minutes, second, or yeah, hour, minute, and second hand. So I don't need that in there. However, what we are not using is this time adjustment knob. So we just put that in there like we did and set that to false. So that overwrites the default value of true for this SimObject only. And that's pretty much it. So all we are doing is we are referencing this default template that Asobo has provided with us, or provided for us. We make sure that we set it up with the proper node ID. We make sure we set it up with the proper animation name that the template expects. Export our animated clock like I showed you before. And then this is the only code we need to write for the clock to make it functional. Yeah, like I said, it's pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of not a whole lot of stuff that you have to do to make this work. So at this point, all we need to do is save this file, and we'll have our file structure here. Make sure you set up or have your SimObject set up. If you've never set up a SimObject before, I kind of showed you the folder structure before, but make sure in your sim.cfg file here, you just define a flightsim.0 inside of the square brackets. Set your title to whatever you want it to be called when you're searching for the SimObject to place it in the sim. I would make this unique, or actually you should always make sure that this is unique. So like I've used my branding and then the airfield identifier in the name. And then we're using the default model and texture folder. We're not defining like, this would be like if you did like pure base or, you know, whatever. I can't rename it because I have the file or a file open, but if you had that like period whatever, you'd name that like, you know, model equals base would be if that was model period base. But since we're just using the default folder, like I said, just leave it as default. Model equals textures equals. And then general, set it to static object. Distance not animate. I can set that pretty low because you're not going to be able to see the hands from very far away. I don't remember if this is in feet or meters. I believe this is in feet. So 200 feet away from the object, it will no longer animate. You can play with that distance if you'd like to. Typically, since I'm using LODs as well, I remove the hands on my first LOD because you can't really see it when that transitions anyways. So I don't really even need that in there. I just throw it in there. And I can't remember if this ignore objects collision actually works for landmark style or not. I don't think it does, but I leave it in there anyways, just as a failsafe, basically. So that's all you need to define in the SimCFG. I'm not going to save that. And as far as actually setting up or, you know, making the sim aware that you have that SimObjects folder, you can just go back to your packages or your package folder, package definitions, open this XML here. And I like to do it this way instead of going back through the sim and using like the wizard or anything to set up a new SimObject. I'll just put a new asset or just copy one of my previous asset groups. Like you can see I have a SimObject type here. So it's just type SimObject. Everything else is going to be the same. Asset directory, package sources, which is the folder we're calling it from. Then it's SimObjects. In this case it's human. So let me I'll select this one so it's the right path. SimObjects landmarks, which is the folder we created, and then ESD67FL, these are the hanger lights, but it's the exact same folder. So just whatever folder name you put in here. For the output directory, you're going to put in the exact same thing, except you're going to omit the package sources /. So it's just going to be SimObjects landmarks, and then the name of the folder, the SimObject folder you created. And then you can just save that, and the next time you build this project, the clock should be available SimObject in the sim that you can then go in and place. And if you've done everything right up to this point, after you place the clock in the sim, you should now have a fully animated clock which tells the current in-sim time. And we can demonstrate that by opening the weather panel up here, and we can just scrub through our time. And we can see that the hands of the clock will actually change to match the current time. So I'll set it to 10:02. And you can see by the tick marks, it's pretty much exactly 10:02. And there you have it. That's how you create a functional clock for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Rodent44, over and out.